So let's introduce our first guest. Welcome, Representative Ichiyama. How are you doing today?
Thank you very much for having me.
You have been doing some tremendous work with our newest committee. Can you give our audience a sense of what was the impetus behind the creation of this committee?
So the Committee on Pandemic and Disaster Preparedness was created last November, in large part out of response to the current pandemic. But we were really tasked with a fundamental question of how can state government overall better respond to all types of disasters? So while we are focused primarily now on pandemic response, we're also looking at natural disasters and man-made disasters. But the thought is that we need to approach it holistically, and not to get siloed in certain subject matter areas, but look at it as state government overall. And how do we provide a better, comprehensive, coordinated approach?
So I like this kind of short-term, long-term approach that you have. What's been your immediate priorities as chair?
So one of the things that we focused on was a vaccine distribution. We've had 3 informational briefings joint with the Senate Health Committee. We've been doing it on a monthly basis, and because things change so rapidly, it's been a really good opportunity to work closely with the Department of Health and vaccine providers to give the public the most up-to-date information about vaccine distribution. We've also been meeting with various stakeholders to try and get a better understanding of how the pandemic has affected their operations. And for state agencies, especially their budget. I think everybody's aware of the current fiscal situation that we're in, but how do we make government run more efficiently on a tighter budget?
Yeah, and something that's kind of put a pause in that is that everyone is right now waiting to see what the federal government is going to do. So that also plays into this whole pandemic response. On the vaccination, I know that you were instrumental along with Speaker Psyche in setting up the vaccination centers. So those informational briefings, the work done by the committee has been really important to make sure that people know where they can go. I really appreciate that. In addition to the vaccines, what are 1 or 2 other hot topic bills, in addition to the priorities that we've already discussed here, have been heard and managed in your committee?
So some of them are updates to our emergency chapter under HRS 127A. So a good example is the penalty section. Any violation of an emergency order is a full misdemeanor. Somebody can be subject up to a year in prison, and that's the only penalty. And I think that shows really that our chapter wasn't built for pandemics. We weren't built for, minor level of violations like not wearing your mask or not following social distancing or gathering restrictions. So one important change that we're looking at is to create more of a spectrum for any violations of emergency order. It could be a fine, it could be a violation, a petty misdemeanor, all the way up to a full misdemeanor.
Really giving flexibility to the people who have to enforce it. I know that you're also doing work with Ichiyama and DOD. For those of us who don't, for the public who doesn't know, what is Ichiyama? What is Chapter 127A?
So that's a really good question. Chapter 127A is the chapter that governs when a state of emergency can be declared. What are the authorities, either the mayor or the governor, when a state of emergency is declared? So, for example, this is a chapter that allows a governor or mayor to suspend certain laws, to ask workers to perform certain functions, to quarantine, for example. It's very broad reaching. And so we're also having discussions with Ichiyama. So Ichiyama, Hawaii Emergency Management Agency, is a part of the Department of Defense, and it's housed within the Department of Defense. So we're also having a discussion about whether or not it should be an attached agency and also report directly to the governor. I think that there was a lot of confusion amongst state agencies and departments at the beginning of this pandemic. So having a cabinet level position to provide that coordination across all state agencies, I think could be very valuable in future disasters.
And I think you've hit on it, right? We might be living with pandemics of these type for a while. We don't know what COVID-19 is going to do. We don't know if there might be a future medical pandemic that we're going to have to deal with. So this is a kind of restructuring of government that the House is interested in that can help us moving into the future.
Yes. And I've asked that question of our state epidemiologist, Dr. Sarah Campbell, how do we know when the pandemic is over? And her answer was, we probably won't know until after that's happened, right? Historically, if you look at the Spanish flu, they didn't know until several years later, okay, this is when we can say the pandemic was over. It's always making sure that we have good surveillance systems, good testing capabilities, especially with these variants, to make sure that we're staying ahead of the curve and making sure our community is prepared.
So there's a lot of focus in your committee on the medical preparedness dealing with the health pandemic, but your committee is also concerned with economic recovery to some degree. And your committee's been working with assisting community and small businesses to adapt to the pandemic. Can you discuss some of the ways that the committee has been working with small businesses and small organizations in our community?
Sure. So one of the big initiatives last year was when we received the CARES funding, the legislature set aside over $60 million for purchasing personal protective equipment, or PPE, face shields, gloves, gowns, booties, or hair coverings. And we wanted to make those freely accessible to small businesses, childcare, elder care, hospitals, and schools, so that staff and students or residents of a long-term care facility would have access to PPE and feel safe. So that was one of our initiatives. And more recently in the committee, we just passed House Bill 1324 to create a commercial rent relief program. And this would be if we receive federal funds, we're looking at ways that we can help small businesses who may have fallen behind in rent. And we're not eligible for prior relief. So that's one of the examples from this session.
And that's a really critical example, because we've heard, we've seen a lot of folks, a lot of different individuals and small businesses get relief, but not necessarily commercial rent relief. So that is something I believe that Representative Ty Cullen has also been working on. In fact, that's Representative Ty Cullen's bill.
Yes.
So again, that's another example of we're also waiting to see what the federal funds are going to do. Do you have any thoughts? This is a little question I'm throwing out at you, a little bit out of the blue, but what are your thoughts about the federal funds that might be coming down?
That's, I think, an open question. We're all anxiously monitoring what Congress is doing and what the Senate will pass out. I think in the last version that I saw, there was roughly $350 billion set aside for state and local governments. But the guardrails around what that money can be used for seem to be still amorphous and being worked on. But essentially COVID relief, so similar to the coronavirus relief funds that we received last year. I think the open question is whether or not it could be used to address budget shortfalls. And that would be a key question for us as our economy has been so heavily impacted by COVID-19, whether or not we can use it to help plug the pukas in the state budget.
So we're all going to be eagerly awaiting that. I know that your committee is going to be part of those conversations. Thank you, Chair Ichiyama, for sharing all of this important information and the work and progress of your committee.